Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us today. I have my partner in crime and friend for many years from Minnesota Housing, Heidi Welch, here. She is going to walk through the first generation Minnesota Housing program that recently released and give you guys all of the good, juicy details and how it works and how it's going to benefit your customers and yourself and the business that you do today. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Heidi, and then at the end, we'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
Absolutely. Can you hear me? Is the mic okay? Okay. All right. Well, good morning. Thank you for having us out today. We're very happy to be here. Really trying to spread the word about the first generation home buyer loan program, and so have been doing a lot of these kind of presentations and visits and Q&A sessions and all that good stuff. So. And I do have with me today also Christina Akinola, and she is on our business development team. And she is, for those of you who are loan officers, she is your business development rep. Not that you can only talk to her, you can talk to any of us. We're all happy to help anyone. But so yes, my name is Heidi Welch. I am the supervisor of our business relationships team, and we're going to be talking about our first gen program today. So before we start, I'm just going to quickly run through the disclosure. So in connection with single-family division loan programs, Minnesota Housing does not make or arrange loans. It's neither an originator nor creditor and is not affiliated with any lender. The terms of any mortgage finance transactions conducted in connection with these programs, including important information such as loan fees, the annual percentage rate, repayment conditions, disclosures, and any other materials which are required to be provided to the consumer are the responsibility of the lender. That slide just makes my legal team really happy. So, okay, so we always like to start any training with our mission, which is housing is foundational to a full life and a thriving state. So we equitably collaborate with individuals, communities, and partners to create, preserve, and finance housing that is affordable. So let's talk about what we're here for, our first generation home buyer loan program. So we did launch on May 6th. The program is now available for any new loans in our system, and it can also be added to a loan that was locked in our system prior to May 6th, as long as the loan, of course, hasn't closed yet. It is a down payment and closing cost loan up to $35,000. You do not have to take the entire $35,000, but it is up to $35,000. To access the Minnesota Housing First Generation Home Buyer Loan Program, you must use it with our startup First Mortgage. And so with that, the income and the purchase price limits are the same as our startup First Mortgage Loan Program. There is a minimum 28% housing ratio in order to use the first generation home buyer loan program. So what that means essentially is when you're structuring your transaction, you figure out the down payment assistance that you're going to be using, and the buyer needs to be at or above 28% on their housing ratio in order to use the first gen program. And if they are below that, what you could look at doing is reducing that loan amount to keep them at or above 28%. But that is a requirement. The program is available statewide, and Minnesota Housing received $50 million in appropriations from the 2023 legislative session. So that is where the money came from. It was specifically directed and intended for use for first generation home buyers. The definition came from the legislature, and it is a one-time program, at least. Possibly there might be, if we could convince them to do additional funding in upcoming years, it could be something else that returns. But essentially what you want to think of it right now is that this is a one-time deal, and once the funds are gone, they're gone with us, okay? So who is a first-generation home buyer? A first-generation home buyer is a borrower they may qualify as a first-gen home buyer if they and their legal parents or guardians. So we're not just looking at the borrower, we're looking at two levels, okay? So parents and legal guardians, parents or legal guardians, and the borrower have to have never owned a home in any country, or they owned a home but they lost it due to foreclosure, and they have not purchased another home since. So the borrower will be signing a first-generation homebuyer affidavit attesting to the fact that they meet these conditions, and at least one of the borrowers on the transaction has to meet these criteria. So as part of the transaction, you will be completing, or loan officers, lenders, will be completing a first-generation homebuyer loan program eligibility worksheet. This document is required on every single transaction with us that has a first-generation homebuyer loan. This indicates an effort to verify the borrower's eligibility, and it does reflect the housing ratio calculation. So this is kind of where it's capturing the fact that you as the lender did your due diligence to document and look into, like if you saw a mortgage on credit, right? If there's a mortgage reporting on credit, well, now you got to ask a few questions, because if your borrower has a mortgage, what the heck is this? Because if they own a home, primary residence, then they're not eligible for first gen. So just, this is a document that attests, you sign off on it saying, yep, I kind of did my due diligence and had the conversations, looked at the documentation that might indicate home ownership and all that kind of stuff, and then also allows for the calculation for that housing ratio. So one kind of a fairly simple way to think about it, who is a first-generation home buyer loan, or who is a first-generation home buyer. This is a little pictograph that we created. So if you remember, I said that the underlying first mortgage program is our startup loan. Now our startup loan is only for first-time home buyers, right? It's not for repeat borrowers. So they need to, the borrowers, first of all, you need to look at, are they first-time buyers? Do they meet our tax code definition of a first-time buyer? And what that is they have not owned a primary residence in the 3 years preceding the date of the mortgage closing. So you got to start there. Are they first-time home buyers? If they are, fabulous. Then you can go to the next step and look at, okay, are they first gen? If they are not first-time buyers, then you're done. They're not eligible for first gen because they have to be first-time buyers in order to be first gen. So once you've determined, okay, yes, they do meet that first-time home buyer requirement, now you're going to look at that next level. Do they meet the first-generation home buyer definition? So has the borrower either never owned a home in any country, or did they own a home but they lost it due to foreclosure and they have not purchased another home since? If the answer to that is also yes, then you can move to the next step and you're going to go to that deeper level and look at the parents or legal guardians. If the answer to that question is no, then you're done. They're not first gen. So we're going to assume that our borrower meets both first-time buyer and the borrower meets that first generation definition. Now we're going to go look at the borrower's parents or legal guardians. Have the borrower's parents or legal guardians also either never owned a home, or they owned a home but lost it due to foreclosure and have not purchased another home since? So that includes being on deed or title and living in the residence while they were on deed or title. And we're looking at both parents or legal guardians, not just one of them, okay? So if the answer to all of those is yes, now you're looking at, okay, this borrower actually may be eligible for this first-generation homebuyer loan program. So I have a couple scenarios for you. And we're giving you the answers because the animation is not set up here, but so Eddie and Ava are purchasing their first home. They're both first-time home buyers. Eddie's parents have owned a home, but Ava's parents have never owned a home. Are they eligible for first gen? Well, yes, because you can read. But the reason for that, does anyone know the reason? Anyone want to try and give a guess? Or are we still waking up and having coffee hit our bloodstreams? So the reason for that is because only one of the borrowers needs to meet the first generation homebuyer definition, right? So in this case, Ava has never owned a home and her parents have never owned a home. So she meets the first generation homebuyer definition. So even though she's on the loan with Eddie, who would not meet the first gen definition, because only one of the borrowers has to meet the definition, they could look at using first gen. All right, Monica is purchasing a home and is a first-time buyer. Monica's parents own a property, but they rent it out. Monica and her parents have never lived in the property since taking title. Is Monica eligible for first gen? Yes, again, because I'm assuming that y'all can read. And does anyone want to take a guess as to why Monica would be eligible, potentially in this case?
Because it was an investment property, not a primary residence?
Because they never lived in the property as their primary residence, correct. Thank you. Okay, Amber's purchasing a home and she's a first-time home buyer. Amber's mother has never owned, but her estranged father has. The parents divorced when she was very young, and Amber's always lived with her mom, hasn't had a whole lot to do with her dad. Is Amber eligible for first gen? No. And the reason is because even though maybe she has zero relationship with her dad and she hasn't lived with him and she hasn't really interacted with him since she was young and the divorce happened, she still has that knowledge that her father owned a home. So again, we're looking at both parents, and because she knows dad owned a home, she's not first gen eligible. All right, Linda and Dan have never owned a home. They are applying for a first generation loan. They're using Dan's parents as non-occupant cosigners. Linda's parents have never owned a primary residence, but Dad's parents, who remember are the non-occupant cosigners, they own their own primary residence. So are Linda and Dan eligible for first gen? Yes. Anyone have a guess as to why? They could be considered to looking at the first generation home buyer loan because Linda and Linda's parents meet our criteria for first gen. So Linda's a first time buyer, never owned a home. Linda's parents never owned a primary residence, and only one of the borrowers has to meet our first gen definition. So in this case, Dan would not meet first gen because his parents, they own their primary residence, but because Linda's parents have not owned, and Linda also meets it, then they could look at first gen. So Annette is a first-time home buyer and applying for a first-generation loan with Aunt Barb. Aunt Barb is a non-occupant cosigner. Annette was raised by Barb, and Barb's a homeowner. Barb was never Annette's legal guardian, and Annette's parents have never owned a primary residence. So could Annette potentially use first gen? Yes, she could. And that is because even though she lived with Aunt Barb, was raised by Aunt Barb was never the legal guardian. And so then we're looking at Annette's actual parents, and they have never owned a primary residence. So Brian is a first-time home buyer and applying for the first-generation home buyer loan. Brian's parents are divorced. His mother never owned a home. His father remarried, and they all lived at the stepmom's home located here in Minnesota. And the reason we call that out is because ownership interests might be different in other states, right? So, and stepmom owned the home before the marriage, and Brian's father was never put on title. So in this case, is Brian potentially eligible for first gen? And the answer to this is no. And the reason for that is because Brian's dad, because he got remarried and stepmom owns a property, now Brian's dad has a marital interest in this property and by default has an ownership interest in the property. And so Brian's dad, because he has that marital interest, does not meet that second level of kind of, looking into is Brian eligible or not. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, what? What if they signed a prenup? I don't, maybe. That would be, I mean.
It's only because it's a presumption of a marital interest, but it's not an actual marital interest.
Well, we're not, that's like, way like out of scope, but like something like that, we would take as a one-off conversation, we would take it to our bond attorney, we would get her legal opinion. I'm not gonna give you a yep, no problem, and I'm not gonna give you a no, that would never work. I think those types of things are gonna be one-off situations, and if you get something like that, then if it were me, I would pick up the phone, make a phone call, provide the information to us so we can talk to our bond attorney and make that decision. Cool? Okay, so what are some of the details of the Minnesota Housing First Generation Loan Program? Now, please remember when I'm talking about this first generation program, I am talking about the Minnesota Housing First Generation Program. There is another another first generation program out there. It just soft launched last week. It's being managed by the Midwest Minnesota CDC, or MMCDC. They are calling their program not the Minnesota. They're calling theirs the First Generation Down Payment Community Assistance Fund. These are two separate programs. They both received funding from that 2023 legislative session. Their program received $100 million. Minnesota Housing received $50 million. Two separate programs. Anything I'm talking about is applicable to the Minnesota Housing Program. If you have questions or need more information, you need to go to the MMCDC's website and check out their program, get their guidelines, get their requirements. If you have questions about their program specifically, you would need to contact them, okay? So for our program, our first gen program can be combined with other down payment and closing cost assistance programs, except the two first gen programs, so our program and the Midwest Minnesota CDC program, or the Community Down Payment Assistance Fund, those two programs cannot be used together. And the reason for that is because of the funding source, the legislature, and we want to take that $150 million and help as many borrowers as we can, right? So that's kind of the logic behind that. We do have lien position guidance posted on our website. That's been a common question. But because you can use the Minnesota Housing First Gen, you can also layer with one of our standard existing down payment assistance and closing cost loans. So our monthly payment loan, our deferred payment loan, or our deferred payment loan plus. That is acceptable. You don't have to use one of our existing DPA loans, but you can. And then you could also use outside other community programs. So you could potentially layer with other programs as well, just not the MMCDC program. So in the case of lien position, if you are layering and using our monthly payment loan, down payment assistance, and closing cost loan, we do require that that one goes into second lien. If you are using any of our other two, the deferred or the deferred payment loan plus, we would go into second lien position with that one. But if you are using another community second from, let's say, Ramsey County, right? They've got some programs. So say you're going to layer in Ramsey County, one of our deferred payment loan and our first gen. If Ramsey County says, okay, we'll do that, we'll allow you to layer us all, but we want to be in second lien position, we would be okay with that as long as it's not our monthly payment loan. If it's one of our deferred payment loans, we would be okay with that. So in that case, it would be startup loan first lien. Ramsey County, this is an example, remember, but Ramsey County second lien. And then if you're using one of our deferred payment loan options, that one would go into third, we would do that. And then if you're also layering first gen, we would be okay to go into fourth or fifth or sixth or whatever. You can put first gen down at the bottom of whatever layering you're doing. But that's all called out on our website too. Okay, so our first gen is deferred and interest free. So our first gen loan program is a 20-year loan. There is a forgiveness factor built into it. If the borrower remains in the home for 10 years, then 50% of the original balance that they take out, whether it's a full 35 or something less, 50% of that original loan is forgiven at year 10. If the borrower stays another 10 years, so they're in the property for a full 20 years, then the remaining second half of that original balance is forgiven at year 20. So, in order to receive the 100% forgiveness, the borrower needs to owner-occupy the property for 20 years. Owner-occupy. They can't buy the house, live in it for 2 years, decide to rent it out, and then think they're going to get forgiveness. One, they're not, because they need to owner-occupy. Two, we potentially would be calling that loan due. It's not built for investing properties. It's built for home ownership, okay? So then the balance does become due if the borrower moves. So they move out of the property, no longer owner-occupied. If it's sold or if it's refinanced during that 20-year term. Now, the caveat to the refinance is that if they refinance and they use the Minnesota Housing Step-Up refinance loan, then we would look at considering a subordination. If they use anything other than a Minnesota Housing First Mortgage for the refinance, wherever they are in that 20-year term would need to be paid off. Yes, I saw a question back there. Yep. Nope. Ours is not okay, so the question was, let's say they buy the house, they live there for 18 years, and then they move, sell, whatever, no longer owner occupying at year 18. Because they lived there for 10 years, that 50% original balance is forgiven, so they don't have to pay that 50% back. But because they have not hit year 20, they do have to pay the full remaining 50%, the second half of whatever their original balance. They do have to pay it back at year 18. So there is no proration built into our program. It's 50% at 10 and the second 50% at 20. Okay, I'm not going to read these to you because you can all read. But these are our startup income limits, and we have them broken out by the metro, by other counties around the state, and then also by 1 to 2 person household, and then if there's a three or more people in the household. And then we also, and this is all on our website, we also define the 11 county metro area, and then we've got a little double asterisk there. So I talked earlier about, yes, you could layer one of our deferred payment loan options with the first gen. If you're using either our deferred payment loan or our deferred payment loan plus, those do have lower income limits than the startup loan in general. So if you're trying to layer in one of our deferred options, you then need to look at the deferred payment loan income limits and make sure that the borrower meets those and not just the startup, because there's a pretty good difference between the deferred payment loan income limit and then the startup income limit. All right, eligible use of funds. So you can use the money towards customary borrower closing costs, standard down payment, additional down payment, mortgage insurance costs. You cannot use it to pay the seller's closing costs or value gap. You can't use it to pay off debt. You can't use it to buy additional points. And you currently cannot use it to pay buyer's agent commissions. I know that's a hot topic right now with the whole settlement and lawsuit and all that stuff going on. We cannot make a decision or allow our down payment assistance funds to cover that buyer's agent commission fee at the moment. We have to, so our master servicer is US Bank. We're waiting for guidance from Fannie Mae, which we just recently got last week, I think, saying that they would view that as a closing cost. So that's a great step in the right direction. VA sent an announcement out yesterday that they figured out a temporary workaround. Well, they will allow it. So now we've got Fannie and VA. We still need to hear from Freddie and FHA particularly, and RD. And then once we hear from all of them, assuming maybe that they all wind up in the same decision, because a lot of times when Fannie makes a proclamation, the others kind of tend to follow suit. Then we need to hear from our master servicer that they will also accept that. So until such time, cannot use it to pay borrower agent commissions. If and when that is allowed, we will let you know. All right, here's another just kind of little graph to help you think about, so how would I look at these loan combinations? So first of all, we talked about startup. Startup is the Minnesota Housing. It's our first time home buyer loan program. So first of all, in order to access our first gen or any of our down payment assistance and closing cost loans, you have to start with our startup loan, right? In this case, I'm talking first time home buyers here. So startup, first you would do that. And then you can have that conversation with your borrower. Okay, you can say, here's the Minnesota Housing First Gen Loan Program, and here's the Midwest Minnesota CDC First Gen Loan Program, and you can explain what the differences are and show them how the two different programs work. And they can choose which one makes sense for them, right? So you could use either one of those. Just because you're using our startup loan does not mean you can't then also layer in the MMCDC program. You can, as long as you can meet their eligibility and the borrower is eligible for that. But if you choose, or if they choose the MMCDC program, then remember you cannot use our first gen. So it's either one or the other on the two first gens. And then, if you still need additional, or your borrower still needs additional assistance or additional down payment, maybe if they borrowed another $12,000, they could get rid of their PMI, right? Maybe that gets them to 80% loan to value, and that's a win, right? So then you would look at, okay, now do we need and do we want to layer in one of our existing standard down payment loans? So our deferred payment loan, our DPL plus, or our monthly payment loan. And as I mentioned earlier, you don't have to use one of our existing DPA loans, but you can. Homebuyer education is required. It's required for all first-gen borrowers, and it's required for all first-time homebuyers with our programs. This is a list of courses that are approved. This list is also on our website in a couple different spots. It doesn't matter, like the Freddie Mac, I get this question pretty often. So somebody calls and says, I'm doing a Fannie loan. Can they still do the Freddie Mac Credit Smart Homebuyer U? Yes, they can. We're not looking at the source of it. As long as it's one of these sources, it's allowed for whatever the loan type it is, all right? But it is required. And this is the homebuyer education. If you are not yet familiar with the MMCDC program, this is a very big difference between our two programs as far as the timing of when the homebuyer education needs to be completed. So I would highly recommend that if you learn nothing else about that program, but you want to use it, well, I would recommend that you learn everything about that program if you're going to use it. But learn the difference between when the home buyer education is required to be completed. For us, it's pretty much any time in the process as long as it happens prior to the loan closing. Now, of course, we always strongly, strongly recommend that the buyer take the home buyer education as soon as possible, early, because it's great information and it just helps them making their decisions and helps them feel comfortable buying the house and doing, this is a big deal, right? But we don't have a requirement around that timing, okay? We want that to happen early in the process, but as long as they have the home buyer education certificate in the loan file and it happens prior to the actual closing date, then for us, that's okay. The MMCDC program, and I'm not supposed to train on it, so I'm trying, to avoid that. I would encourage you to go to their website, but they want that home buyer education completed way early. They want it before you're writing a purchase agreement. They want it before you're putting in an application for their program. So like I said, big difference. Make sure you're familiar and understand that. Because if the buyer doesn't take the education at the right time, it might just knock them right out of being eligible for that other program, okay? Okay, I'm just gonna go through the commitment system stuff really fast because it's probably not super applicable to a lot of you, but and actually I thought I hid this slide, but anyway, the first gen that was in our system, if they were locked in our system prior to May 6th, there's just a little system tweak that needs to happen, but I think pretty much everyone has worked through that. We're not really getting questions on that anymore. And you have a lock desk, right, Nellie? Yeah. So most of you, it's probably not even applicable information. So just pretend I hid the slide because I'm pretty sure that I did. I don't know, popped up. And then these are just some screenshots of what it looks like in our system. So just the takeaway from this is that it's a super simple add to our system. It's basically whoever's in there locking the loan in our system needs to answer 2 extra questions than they had to before. So very, very easy to use our program and get it going through our system. Okay, we do require that all of our down payment assistance and closing cost loans be disclosed. They're loans. None of our loans are grants, right? First gen might be forgivable after 20 years, but it is a grant. I mean, it is a loan until that 20-year anniversary. And so with that, any of our down payment assistance and closing cost loans, we have the expectation that you as a lender are disclosing those and following TRID guidelines to do so. If you're using first gen with an FHA first mortgage, with our startup FHA first loan, there are a couple of additional documents that need to happen with that as well. They're already set up in our commitment system, so as long as you have it set up correctly in our system, you should be able to just pull the documents, or your closing team or your processing team or whoever's in there pulling docs for y'all should just pull up automatically. So how can borrowers get ready? Take a home buyer education class. We talked about that already. Find a HUD certified counselor. Maybe they need a little more than education. Maybe they need to go a little deeper with what they need to do or where they're at. We've got a website for HUD certified counselors. They offer free services around the state. And then also find a participating lender and learn more about the program. So a couple questions that we get pretty often. So people are wondering who can offer the Minnesota Housing First Generation Home Buyer Loan Program. And the answer to that is that anyone who is a lender with Minnesota Housing, so if they're a participating lender, either one that's new or coming on board or has been with us for years, they automatically have access to the First Generation Home Buyer Loan Program. Excuse me. So we're not requiring any additional application or any other hoops that anyone has to jump through. As long as they're already a participating lender with us or become a participating lender, they can offer it. And then Is this the same as the First Generation Homebuyer Community Down Payment Assistance Fund? It is not. They are two separate first-gen programs, came from the same legislative session, same funding source, same goal to help first-generation home buyers, but they are two different programs, and again, I'll just remind you, they cannot be layered together. So if you have more questions, want more information, check out our website. We have all of this and more on our website. And then these are some additional resources. Again, like I said, we have all of this and more on our website. So if you haven't visited, check it out. There's lots of really good information. Can help you get familiar with it. Yeah. And I think, yeah, we're at, thank you. This is one of my teams, the Partner Solutions. If you work with us, especially as a loan officer, you probably chatted with one or all of them on the team at some point. Amazing, amazing, amazing. And they are there to help you with questions and guidance and all of that kind of stuff. So, all right.
Perfect. Thank you,
Questions?
Heidi. Any questions? Does anybody have? All right, I'll come and I will share my microphone.
Oh,
It's
let's use the
streaming
mic.
though, so that way people can hear your question.
So I had a unique situation a while ago where there was an individual who was married and was not on the title of the home. Would that make them ineligible for this program if they
Yes.
were now divorced?
Yes.
Okay.
Because of the marital interest, and so again, that might be a little bit similar to like a one-off. There might be some timing pieces involved there, and it might be like if they got divorced and they were never like given anything for it, it might be
proper
something, but we would need to again run that past our bond attorney.
What about individuals who grew up in the foster care system?
So foster parents, unless they either adopted them or became legal guardians or, in some way took that legal, somebody help me. Legal step, okay, that works, to become like their parents, we're not looking at foster as parents or legal guardians.
So would they not have to worry about that aspect?
I mean, again,
I know it's a
think
unique
that-
situation. Yeah, as if they don't have any legal guardians, if they aged out of the foster care system.
If
I
they-
just want to make sure that I'm educated
Yeah,
on
yeah,
this,
yeah,
so I'm
yeah.
not like, oh.
Yep. No, so the question, because I just want to make sure everyone hears the question.
Yeah.
But okay, so if they aged out of foster care, if they have no parents or legal guardians, then that would be a situation where they could say, yes, I am a first generation, or I am attesting to this fact.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Mom and dad married, mom and dad got divorced, shared custody with the kids, one parent lost the house to foreclosure. Are any of the kids eligible?
So who lost the house, mom or dad?
Dad.
Okay, so dad lost a home to foreclosure, has not purchased since. So dad meets that second level because he either never owned a home or he lost a home due to foreclosure and has not purchased since. So dad, yes. Now let's look at mom. Has mom ever owned a home?
Yes.
Was it the home that got lost to foreclosure?
No.
So mom does not meet it. So then we do not have a first-gen borrower.
Okay, so both parents have to
Both
meet that
parents.
criteria.
Both parents or legal guardians need to be taken into consideration, not just one or the other, regardless of the relationship, if there's an estrangement, whatever. The only time that might come into play is if there has been absolutely no contact from the estranged parent, never saw him again in my life, have no idea if they ever bought a house or not. Then that would be a potential situation where the borrower could say, I truly do not know. But the fact that they were estranged is not in and of itself enough. It's whether they have the knowledge or not of them owning a home.
Okay, 1 second. I'm gonna go here and then we'll grab you 2 questions.
Does this apply only for house in, like if they own a house, or is it also if they own land elsewhere?
Raw
either here-
land is not owning a home. It's not a primary residence.
Okay, so, okay, got it.
So it would be if it was like a primary residence. So like in the case where they used it as an investment property, it didn't count as, yep, so you, in the same case where the land, it wouldn't count as, so they would qualify. Yep. All right, Tyler, I'm coming back here. All right, Heidi, we have a question from Tim. It says, how would you verify a parent who might have owned a home in another country and are here to escape their old country?
So I guess I would say, again, that's going to come down to the knowledge, right? If they know that they owned a home, then they're not first gen. The fact, and this might sound a little harsh, but the fact that maybe they were fleeing from war or a political situation, it's a refugee situation. Again, remember that this definition came from our legislature. It's not like we took it out of what they said, here's your definition. And so it's literally foreclosure, and that is it. It's not act of God, fleeing from war, deed in lieu. It's not any of those situations. It's foreclosure, and they have not purchased since.
Heidi, I have a question. Do you have any idea, or have you guys considered how long the 50 million is going to last for this first generation program?
Well, I can tell you it's going fast. So if you want it, get in there and get it. As of this morning, we were at about 9.6 million committed already, and we've been live for just over a month. So now, that sounds really scary because that's like, we got 50 million, we're almost at 10 million. But we were also live about a month before this other first gen program went live. So we're imagining that there's going to be a little bit of balance out in our, in our numbers, because some will go to that program, some may stay with us. So, and then of course there's always the issue of they still have to find a house, get an offer accepted, right? So that might slow things down a little bit too. I think initially there was like this huge bump because people were like waiting, knowing it was coming, and they had all these buyers lined up, and they had houses in mind, and they had all this stuff kind of just waiting for us to say, okay, go. So when we did, it was like, whew.
I just have a comment that I was going to say, Mike, want to point out is that there is the purchase price limit. It's not on a lot of the graphs with the startup program, but there is the purchase price limit.
Yep, there is a purchase price limit. Again, it's all on our website. And as I mentioned early in the presentation, because it follows startup, it's the startup income limits and it's the startup purchase price limits, all on our website.
Are the asset limits?
The asset limits are asset limits are applicable to the deferred payment loan options only, not to startup, not to monthly payment loan. Not to first gen, because first gen follows startup and the asset limit is not on startup.
So you can do the startup if you don't use the deferred, you can do the 35 only.
You could, or if you need the deferred and they meet the deferred requirements, you could layer it in. Or if they need more money, you could look at the monthly payment loan second, or you could just do first gen. You can do any of those combinations. It's what your borrower needs. It's what they want. It's,
Once the 50 million is reserved, is there a waiting list?
No, we're not going to be doing a waiting list. We consulted with our attorneys and they won't approve us to do a waiting list. That's not a structure, because that kind of implies a promise to someone who's on the waiting list, and we can't. What we are working on and planning to do is hopefully sooner rather than later, but probably not like this week or next week, we're going to be having some kind of like a running ticker balance type of a thing on our website. It'll be on the consumer side of the website, so everyone can go there and check it out. So, and we'll be updating that daily or weekly, and then possibly hourly as we're starting to, really wind down on funds. And then when we get down to a certain number, like maybe there's just like 2 million or so, and I'm just, don't hold me to this. We're still kicking around the ideas and trying to figure out the best way to do this. But once we get to a certain point where we're getting pretty close, what we are probably going to do is shut off your access in our commitment system and manage it manually on our side, and that way we can get timestamps from when the requests come in and things like that, so that we can, manage it that way. But more to come on that. We haven't worked all those kinks out yet.
Okay, I've got one other question.
Sure.
What if the parents did own homes but are now deceased? Does that matter?
No.
If they're no longer living, they just owned a home, it doesn't matter?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so if the parents owned homes, either together or separately or whatever, or one of them did and one of them didn't, and they're no longer living, it's still that level. This sounds maybe harsh. It's not whether mom and dad are alive or not here anymore. It's whether they owned or not. Because if they owned homes and they're no longer here, then chances are pretty great that the children probably receive some type of something from that ownership, right? What we're trying to get at here with this program and the other program is those borrowers, those people who have not had that generational wealth. They have not had that advantage in their life. And so that's who we're trying to assist with these programs. So we don't require that they're U.S. citizens, but we do require that whatever status they're in, you are able to meet any underwriting requirements. So whatever Fannie requires, Freddie requires, FHA requires, all that kind of stuff. You need to be able to meet all that. And as long as you can meet that, then we're okay.
I have a question. So we have, let's say we have our clients that are out shopping, working with our sales executives. They don't have a property yet. Can we reserve the first time? So they actually have to have a property purchase contract in order
Yep.
for us to reserve those funds?
Yes, because it's just like how you do today. You can't go in our system today and lock funds on a TBD property. You need to have a closing date and a signed purchase agreement before you go into our system and you're locking up those funds in our system. It's the same thing. It's just that now you're going in and then also potentially adding first gen.
Perfect.
Yep.
We can reserve funds right before it's underwritten.
Yes, once you have a purchase contract, so that's what once we have a property and a purchase contract, then we can reserve the funds for the first generation loan.
Correct.
Any other questions?
I would just also say that the other program, the Community Down Payment Assistance Fund, has we have some pretty different criteria and requirements around that piece of it too. So again, if you haven't checked out that program, I would get familiar with their stuff. And does everyone have their website?
I think the website's out there. Right now, that's not a program that Results Home Mortgage has started yet.
Okay.
We started with the Minnesota Housing Program because the benefits to the client, we feel, are definitely better.
Well, also the fact that theirs just went live last week, so
Correct.
it wasn't even available. So.
Exactly. And it's only a soft launch, so it's not even fully live from everything that I've been told. It's very limited in its space. So, any other questions?
Yeah. You got us. Grill us.
No? Okay. All right, well, I'd like to thank everybody who's joined us. I'd like to give a special thanks to Heidi Welch from Minnesota Housing for coming out today and helping us learn about this program.